Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us here at 4:30. Our conversations today center on issues that have worked through or will soon be worked on by the legislature. One could be a boost for local communities here in the state. The other could be a problem for local industries and manufacturers around the state. The State Assembly was scheduled to vote on an amendment tomorrow that could limit the technical college system's funding. But this afternoon, that vote was pulled from the calendar for tomorrow. Puts it on hold for now. Now, if approved, this system would lose its ability to raise local taxes to meet operational costs. It would still receive property taxes, but only equal to their prior year's levy, plus any changes in property value. Now, the end result, technical colleges would become more reliant on state funding to handle increased costs and programming. And we are joined now by Dr. James Raffin. He is the president emeritus of NWTC, and Dr. Chris Matheny, the Fox Valley Technical College president, join us to talk about this issue. So let's start with a question for both of you. Dr. Matheny, you can go first on this. If this amendment passes, in your opinion, what would it mean to the technical college system here in the state?
Well, I think for us, what it really means is that we become much more dependent on revenue from the state legislature and from Madison, which really makes us less responsive to our local labor market needs. And so our concern about this is that what we really enjoy about the work that we do and what our local employers really appreciate is our ability to be responsive to them for local priorities and local needs. And so the shift to Madison is concerning for that reason.
Dr. Raffin?
I'd agree with Chris. We've already had a significant portion of our property tax ability to levy property tax swapped out for monies from the state, and I think that was probably appropriate at the time. But the state's already funding us at about 44%, and with that, just by way of example, the increase that we received or is being discussed for this coming year is not really taking that into account. So, it's creating significant financial stress for all of us.
Dr. Raffin, let me stay with you for a second on this. Given what you just said there, how it could create financial stress, have you been given any indication or do you have an understanding of why the legislature is considering this?
Yes, I think the legislature is very concerned about keeping property taxes under control. I had a recent conversation with one of the legislators on this, and that's clear what the intent is. And I think at least that individual believes that what's being proposed would still keep us whole. It's just, if we look at the history, what commitments that have been made to, whether it was K-12 when they decided to fund it at 75%, or if it was to the university system, that it has left them extremely vulnerable to the ups and downs of the legislature. And that's the very thing that we're concerned about.
All right, that vulnerability, Dr. Matheny, we're seeing it play out right now with the UW system as that budget proposal is battled over. There are being other things tied into it by the Assembly Speaker, Robin Vos. Do you fear that's the future of the technical college system if this comes to pass and the legislature now has more control over your funding?
Well, I would say the fear is that every legislature, no matter who they are or what party they belong to, has their own set of priorities, and those priorities are elected statewide priorities that don't necessarily meet the needs that we'll have in Northeast Wisconsin. I do think it is a concern that you take, in the case of Fox Valley Tech, what is now currently about $22 million a year in state property tax levy, which, by the way, that's less than, our total levy is less than $84 per $100,000 of assessed valuation. So it's not a huge amount of money that's going to come off the property tax rolls for any individual. But you take that $22 million and ability to respond to our local needs, and you shift it to statewide priorities in Madison. I'm not going to argue that statewide priorities aren't important, but I do think that it's the diversity of funding that makes us strong. We have state support, we have local support, and we have support from our students in the form of tuition, and that gives us the ability to be responsive to all three without putting all the eggs in one basket.
Yeah, you talk about that responsiveness, and we've talked with both of your institutions on this program many times about the collaborations you often are coming up with local industry to meet the needs. And Dr. Matheny, you mentioned that, Dr. Raffin, you as well. The Wisconsin Policy Forum research says that the Wisconsin Technical College system is the 5th best funded system in the country, but the system president, Dr. Morna Foy, says comparing it to other such systems around the country is, quote, not apples to apples. Can you explain why that's the case? I think it's based on your ability to respond to employers' needs. But Dr. Raffin, you want to take a shot at that?
Sure. Well, first off, most of the colleges around the country, community colleges, started out their history as being transfer institutions and then subsequently began to bring in the vocational and occupational training. So Wisconsin's had a rich history of supporting this technical and occupational training, which in and of itself tends to be more expensive. First of all, you're competing for teachers with the private sector labor market because, for instance, I hire a teacher to teach gas utility. That particular instructor can earn more out in the field doing that work than he can teaching. So we're pressed by that. At the same time, just the amount of equipment and therefore lab aids and the amount of hands-on instruction requires more folks to be teaching it. I'm not going to be able to have a classroom of 30 or 35 learning how to weld all at the same time.
Right.
You can imagine 35 welders that never held a torch before. That'd be a little scary. So, I think, we're comparing a very different community college system with what we have here in Wisconsin, which, by the way, is largely respected across the nation. Right. And often we are approached with sharing what we're doing in vocational and occupational education.
It is the longest running technical college system in the country as well. So let's finish on this for both of you. Dr. Raffin, you mentioned you did speak with a legislator about this issue. Have either of you had any indication from the governor's office which way he would be leaning on this? Dr. Matheny, we'll start with you.
I personally have not had any contact with the governor's office, but the governor and frankly, all of our legislators have been quite supportive when we talk to them individually about the need to respond to local labor market need. I guess what I would say is I have had many conversations with employers over the last several days about their concerns as well about our ability to be responsive. And the example I would give of that is Jeff mentioned utility workers. We have a similar situation with machinists. We have the ability now to be responsive to those needs, to add faculty when needed, to expand programs when needed. And my fear is that centralizing these funds would cause us to have to go to Madison on a biennial basis and ask whether or not we can expand programming in the way that our local employment market really needs.
Dr. Raffin, President Emeritus, last word to you, sir.
I respect what the legislator is trying to do. They're trying to reduce property taxes, and I can respect that. But I would say that our system has been economically and financially extremely responsive and efficient. And we have continued over the last number of years to increase that efficiency as funding has frankly not kept up with the costs that we incur. And frankly, we're proud of the innovations that we've put in place. So I'm not complaining about that, but there does reach a point at which we have to make a decision in terms of how we're going to meet the need for skilled labor. And we know that that is a significant problem, both now and in the future.
Well, gentlemen, we will keep our eye on Madison this week to see how this plays out. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.
Welcome.